The dawn light creeps across the waterways of Chioggia, Italy. It's April 28, 1945, and 3 jeeps roll to a stop before the German command post. Inside are just 9 men. 9 men facing 700 battle-hardened Wehrmacht soldiers who have been ordered to fight to the death. Captain Jean Canary steps out of the lead vehicle, his boots splashing in the flooded streets. Behind him, the wreckage of Mussolini's Italy smolders in ruins. Ahead, an entire German garrison holds defensive positions across a strategic town that commands the approaches to Venice. British 8th Army commanders have warned him, bypass Chioggia, don't engage. The enemy is too strong, too well entrenched. Taking this position will require a full battalion, heavy artillery, and probable casualties in the hundreds. Canary ignores them all. He walks alone toward the German lines. What the German commander at Chioggia doesn't know is that this audacious Frenchman has just driven through the night with the smallest independent fighting unit in the entire British Army, a unit so obscure that most Allied generals have never heard of it, a unit that shouldn't even exist according to every military regulation in the book. What the German commander doesn't know is that over the past 10 days, this ghost force has already killed over 40 enemy soldiers, captured 1,035 prisoners, and seized 16 field guns while suffering only 3 men killed. What the German commander doesn't know is that the man now approaching his headquarters learned his tactics from one of the most unorthodox warriors ever to wear British uniform, a 45-year-old Belgian engineer with 0 military training who somehow convinced the British Army to let him form his own private army. And what the German commander at Chioggia definitely doesn't know is that everything he believes about the Allied forces surrounding him is a carefully constructed lie. By the time the sun reaches its zenith on this April morning, 700 German soldiers will lay down their weapons without firing a shot. 2 days later, another 300 will surrender to a single patrol, charging an 88mm gun battery. In just 72 hours, 9 jeeps will accomplish what entire battalions could not. This is the true story of how a middle-aged factory manager with no combat experience built the most lethal small unit of World War II, and how his men pulled off one of the war's most audacious deceptions. December 1941, North Africa. The British 8th Army is locked in a brutal seesaw campaign against Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps. Despite Winston Churchill's urgent demands for victory, British commanders face an impossible mathematics problem. Rommel's supply lines stretch over 800 miles from Tripoli to the front lines. British intelligence knows where the fuel dumps are, where the ammunition stockpiles sit, where hundreds of aircraft rest on remote desert airstrips, but conventional forces can't reach them. The distances are too vast, the desert too unforgiving. Every attempted raid by regular units ends in disaster. By late 1942, the situation becomes critical. Rommel is preparing his final push toward Cairo and the Suez Canal. German bombers pound Malta from airfields in Libya. Italian convoys run supplies across the Mediterranean with impunity. British planners calculate that if they could destroy just 10% of these rear area assets, Rommel's offensive would collapse. They try everything. Long-range desert group patrols venture behind enemy lines gathering intelligence, but their primary mission is reconnaissance, not destruction. The newly formed Special Air Service conducts hit-and-run airfield raids, but they number fewer than 200 men. Royal Air Force bombers attempt to strike supply dumps, but Axis air defenses shoot down dozens of aircraft for minimal damage. The experts all agree. Disrupting enemy logistics requires massive conventional offensives, not commando pinpricks. Colonel Sean Hackett, who controls all special forces in the Middle East, reviews proposal after proposal for irregular warfare units. He rejects most. Too expensive, too specialized, too dangerous. The casualty projections are astronomical, and the regulations are absolutely clear. Special forces must be commanded by experienced officers with proven combat records. They must undergo rigorous training at established schools. They must operate within clearly defined command structures. Every successful commando unit in the British Army follows these rules. The SAS, the LRDG, the Royal Marine Commandos. What nobody needs, according to every general in Cairo, is some random civilian with a crazy idea about forming his own private army. The stakes couldn't be higher. In June 1942, Rommel captures Tobruk along with 33,000 Allied prisoners and mountains of supplies. He pushes to within 60 miles of Alexandria. If Egypt falls, the entire Middle East collapses. British planners draw up evacuation plans. In London, Churchill faces a vote of no confidence in Parliament. The Royal Air Force loses planes faster than factories can replace them. Malta teeters on the edge of starvation. German U-boats sink over 700,000 tons of Allied shipping in November 1942 alone. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every tank that reaches Rommel comes through those rear area depots that British forces cannot touch. Staff officers propose solutions: more tanks, more infantry, more artillery, more air raids. But the mathematics remains brutal. To advance 30 miles requires weeks of preparation, thousands of tons of supplies, and acceptable casualties measured in thousands of men. The desert swallows conventional armies whole. By autumn 1942, Allied intelligence identifies over 200 high-value targets behind Axis lines. Airfields, supply dumps, headquarters, communication centers. Destroying them could cripple Rommel's offensive capability, but every target sits hundreds of miles beyond British lines, guarded by thousands of enemy troops, separated from Allied forces by the most hostile terrain on Earth. The conventional wisdom is unanimous. Long-range raiding through enemy-held territory is suicide. Small units lack the firepower to overcome prepared defenses. They lack the supplies to sustain operations. They lack the communications to coordinate with friendly forces, and they lack any realistic hope of survival if things go wrong. What the British Army needs, the experts insist, is more of what they already have. More conventional units conducting conventional operations according to conventional doctrine. What the British Army is about to get is Vladimir Peniakoff. Vladimir Popski Peniakoff is exactly the wrong man for military service. Born in Belgium in 1897 to wealthy Russian émigré parents, he's 45 years old in 1942, far too old for combat duty. He has no military training, no battlefield experience, no command qualifications. He's a factory manager, an engineer, a civilian who spent the last 15 years running a sugar company in Egypt. His only credentials are decidedly unmilitary. He speaks Arabic, owns a beat-up Ford Model A, and enjoys taking weekend drives into the desert to visit Bedouin tribes. British Army regulations state clearly that combat units must be led by officers with proven service records. Peniakoff holds a commission as a second lieutenant, probably the oldest second lieutenant in the British Army, only because he lied his way into the Libyan Arab force. His appearance matches his lack of credentials. Short, powerfully built, square-faced, moody, and explosive in temperament, he's often muddle-headed, according to one long-range desert group officer. Another notes he's become very Arab in his ways, particularly in relation to time. He wears mismatched uniform pieces, shows up late to briefings, and argues with superior officers about tactics. This is not the profile of a legendary commando leader. But in September 1942, Colonel Sean Hackett reads something that changes everything. Peniakoff has submitted a detailed report on irregular warfare after spending 5 months behind enemy lines commanding a small Libyan Arab force detachment. The report describes tactics nobody has tried, using tiny, highly mobile units to strike targets that larger forces cannot reach, moving through enemy territory by bluff and deception rather than force, turning the desert's vastness from an obstacle into an advantage. Most importantly, Peniakoff's report includes something the British Army desperately needs: proof that it works. Operating with just 22 Senussi Arabs, a British sergeant, and no transport of his own, Peniakoff has conducted road watches, rescued downed airmen, and destroyed a 450,000-gallon German fuel dump. All without losing a single man. Hackett makes a calculated gamble. He invites Peniakoff to accompany an LRDG raid on the airfield at Bars, Libya, scheduled for September 13, 1942. "Come along as an observer," Hackett suggests. "While you're away, I'll think of something for you to do." The Bars raid becomes Peniakoff's graduate school in desert warfare. Riding with 2 LRDG patrols commanded by Major Jake Easonsmith, he watches the raiders drive 550 miles behind Rommel's lines, navigate through enemy checkpoints, and strike the German airfield at dawn on September 14th. In minutes, they destroy 24 aircraft, damage 12 more, blow up 10 trucks and a fuel tanker. German and Italian soldiers die in the confusion. The LRDG patrols vanish back into the desert before enemy reinforcements arrive. Peniakoff doesn't just observe, he participates. A bullet shatters his finger. Shrapnel tears into his leg. He returns to Cairo with his finger amputated and his mind ablaze with possibilities. He goes straight to Colonel Hackett's office with an impossible proposal. Give him 6 jeeps, 23 men, and permission to form the smallest independent fighting unit in British military history. Hackett should laugh him out of the room. Instead, on October 8, 1942, he says yes. The workshop sits behind British headquarters in Cairo, far from prying eyes. It's here that Peniakoff and his first recruits transform 6 ordinary jeeps into something the Wehrmacht has never encountered. Each vehicle gets twin Vickers 303 machine guns mounted on swivel posts. Later models will carry American .30 caliber and .50 caliber Brownings scavenged from damaged aircraft. Spare fuel cans line the sides, enough for 1,500 miles without resupply. Sun compasses from the LRDG for desert navigation, radio sets for communication, and over a ton of explosives. Plastic charges, time delay fuses, incendiaries designed by Britain's Special Operations Executive. Peniakoff recruits by instinct rather than regulation. His first officer is Captain Bob Park-Yoni, a Scot from the Libyan Arab force. His second is Lieutenant Jean Canary, a French lawyer with 0 combat experience. He steals Sergeant Major Watterson from the King's Dragoon Guards. He poaches the one-eyed Corporal Locke from the LRDG. He grabs drivers from the Royal Army Service Corps, a surveyor named Petrie from a mapping unit. By conventional standards, it's a circus. The unit needs a name. Official designation, No. 1 Demolition Squadron. Peniakoff hates it. Colonel Hackett suggests an alternative: Popski's Private Army. The nickname Popski comes from LRDG New Zealanders who found Peniakoff too difficult for radio transmission. Peniakoff loves it. He immediately orders shoulder flashes reading PPA and designs cap badges in the form of a 16th century Italian astrolabe. Then comes the training. Conventional forces train for months at established schools. Peniakoff has 3 weeks. He drives his men into the desert and teaches them everything the manuals say is impossible. How to navigate by sun compass and dead reckoning across featureless sand seas. How to approach German checkpoints with forged papers and sheer audacity. How to sabotage aircraft so they'll explode hours after the raiders have vanished. How to survive on 11 days of rations stretched across 6 weeks. Most crucially, he teaches them his philosophy. Think like bandits, not soldiers. Never attack unless you can disappear. Never stay where the enemy expects you. Use confusion and deception as weapons more powerful than explosives. When a senior officer inspects PPA before their first mission, he's appalled. The men wear mismatched uniforms, British battle dress mixed with Arab headgear and captured Italian boots. Discipline is non-existent. Nobody salutes. The word sir is rarely heard. Officers and men share the same rations, sleep in the same tents, argue tactics as equals. This is illegal, the officer declares. British military regulations require proper uniform, proper military courtesy, proper chain of command. You can't just ignore regulations because they're inconvenient. Peniakoff's response is pure Popski. Then change the regulations. On October 23, 1942, 4 jeeps and 2 3-ton trucks roll out of Cairo carrying Peniakoff, Captain Yuni, 12 British soldiers, and 3 Libyan Arabs. They're heading to Kufra, then on to Tunisia, carrying enough ammunition and explosives to fight a small war. Nobody except Colonel Hackett expects them to survive a month. They'll survive 3 years and become a legend. The room erupts the moment Peniakoff finishes his briefing. It's November 1942. British 8th Army headquarters in Cairo. Montgomery has just won El Alamein and is pushing Rommel back across Libya. Now Peniakoff stands before a conference room of colonels and generals, proposing to take his ragtag unit into Tunisia, where American, British, and German armies are locked in chaotic 3-way combat and operate behind enemy lines without direct command oversight. Absolutely not. A lieutenant colonel from staff operations slams his palm on the table. Your unit lacks proper training. You have no established communications protocol. You're not integrated into any command structure. If you get into trouble, we have no assets to extract you. A brigadier from intelligence adds fuel to the fire. The LRDG conducts reconnaissance. The SAS raids airfields. What exactly do you bring that we don't already have? You're proposing to risk 20 men and 6 vehicles on operations that duplicate existing capabilities. But the most damning criticism comes from a major who commanded a failed raid 3 months earlier. I led 50 men in armored cars on a similar mission. We lost 11 vehicles and 28 men killed or captured. You think you can succeed with 20 men in unarmored jeeps? This isn't bravery, it's suicide. The room's consensus is clear. Deny the request. Send PPA back to conventional duties. Peniakoff lacks the credentials, the resources, and most importantly, the permission to operate independently behind enemy lines in an active combat theater. Peniakoff doesn't argue. Instead, he produces a document. It's an after-action report from the LRDG describing the September 14th Barsi raid. 24 aircraft destroyed, 12 damaged, fuel and vehicles eliminated, total Allied casualties, 11 wounded, 10 captured. The report specifically credits Peniakoff's tactical suggestions during the approach march. The LRDG succeeds, Peniakoff says quietly, because they don't fight like conventional forces. They use the desert's size as camouflage. They strike when the enemy is unprepared. They vanish before reinforcements arrive. I propose to do the same thing, but instead of reconnaissance, we focus entirely on destruction. A staff colonel interjects, the LRDG is commanded by experienced officers with years of desert warfare experience. You're a factory manager with 6 months in combat. Who trained you? The LRDG trained me, Peniakoff replies, and I've trained my men the same way, but there's a difference. The LRDG watches roads and reports intelligence, essential work. But for every German convoy they report, dozens more reach Rommel unmolested. We don't report, we destroy. The brigadier leans forward. And when you encounter a prepared defensive position, when you run into a unit larger than your entire force, the LRDG can withdraw because their mission allows it. Yours doesn't. You'll have to fight. And 6 jeeps cannot win against a reinforced company. Then we won't fight them, Peniakoff says. We'll go around. We'll wait. We'll bluff. In 5 months, operating in the Jebel Akhdar, I moved through territory crawling with Italian troops. I destroyed targets. I rescued Allied pilots. I never once engaged in a stand-up fight because I never once put myself in a position where I had to. The lieutenant colonel tries again. Even if, and I emphasize if, your tactics work, the risk is unjustifiable. You're asking us to authorize an independent command with no oversight, no established supply line, and no extraction plan. That violates every principle of command and control. The arguments continue for 20 minutes. Finally, a quiet voice cuts through the debate. Let him go. Everyone turns. Major General John Harding, commander of Third Corps, has been sitting silently in the corner. Now he stands. The lieutenant colonel is correct. This violates normal procedure. The major is correct. The risks are severe. But I've read Peniakoff's report from the Jebel Akhdar. I've read the LRDG assessment of his performance at Bars, and I've read the intelligence estimates of German supply operations in Tunisia. Harding walks to the map on the wall. We're about to commit 5 divisions to Tunisia. Rommel's retreating from Libya with his forces intact. If those 2 armies link up with adequate supplies, this campaign could last another year, unless someone disrupts their logistics. He turns to face Peniakoff. You're authorized to operate under First Army Command. You'll report to me personally. Your mission is simple. Destroy anything that helps the enemy and don't get caught doing it. The room falls silent. General Harding looks directly at the lieutenant colonel who started the objections. Change the regulations. If you're enjoying this incredible true story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. What happens next will blow your mind. The data validates Peniakoff's concept almost immediately. Between November 1942 and May 1943, Popski's private army operates in the gap between German and American forces in Tunisia. The metrics are staggering. 600 Italian prisoners captured, dozens of vehicles destroyed, multiple airfields raided, supply convoys ambushed, communications lines cut, chaos spread across hundreds of miles of enemy territory. Total PPA casualties, 0 killed, 2 wounded. The British Army staff officers who predicted disaster now study PPA's methods. How does a 20-man unit accomplish what failed 50-man conventional raids? The secret lies in Peniakoff's radical approach to desert warfare. Unlike conventional forces that rely on firepower and armor, PPA relies on intelligence and deception. They travel at night. They use captured Italian and German uniforms for checkpoint approaches, technically illegal under military law, but devastatingly effective. They speak Italian and German to bluff their way past sentries. They plant explosives with time delay fuses, then vanish hours before the blast. They never camp in the same place twice. They never establish patterns. They never engage in firefights unless cornered. One raid exemplifies their methods. March 1943, near the Mareth Line. PPA discovers a German supply column moving through a mountain pass. Conventional tactics call for an ambush. Hide, wait, then unleash overwhelming firepower at close range. But Peniakoff recognizes that destroying one convoy will simply alert German forces to their presence. Instead, PPA follows the convoy at a distance, noting its route and schedule. They plant delayed action mines along the road the convoy will use on its return journey. They sabotage a relay station so German commanders cannot receive reports of the attack. Then they strike a fuel dump 10 miles away, creating confusion about their actual position. By the time the convoy hits the mines, PPA is 30 miles away, hitting another target. German intelligence concludes 3 separate partisan groups are operating in the area. They pull an entire battalion off the front line for rear area security. This is Peniakoff's genius, using 20 men to tie down 1,000. By May 1943, when Axis forces in North Africa surrender, PPA has proven its concept. Colonel Hackett was right. General Harding was right. The skeptics were wrong. But North Africa was just the proving ground. Italy will be the real test. September 9, 1943, the port of Taranto, Italy. While the 1st Airborne Division secures a defensive perimeter, Peniakoff takes 5 jeeps and disappears into the Italian countryside. His mission: locate German positions, identify landing grounds for the RAF, and determine whether Italian forces will fight alongside their former German allies. He returns 30 hours later with intelligence that shapes the entire campaign. Italian commanders are confused, demoralized, willing to cooperate. German forces are pulling back rather than defending forward positions. The road to Brindisi is open. Most crucially, Peniakoff brings documents captured from a German quartermaster in Gravina. Complete strength returns for the 1st Parachute Division and every German unit in the region. How did he capture these documents? Peniakoff called the German quartermaster by telephone, posed as an Italian quartermaster, sold him imaginary cases of cognac, then drove into the German garrison in an unmarked jeep and knocked the major unconscious with a Kosh. It's the kind of operation that couldn't possibly work. Except it does. Late September 1943, Captain Bob Juni leads 10 men and 4 jeeps onto the Gargano Peninsula to scout for German forces. He discovers the Wehrmacht has already evacuated. Then he pursues them to the River Fortore, where German engineers are mining a critical ford. Juni attacks immediately with 4 jeeps. Picture the scene. It's late afternoon, golden light slanting across the water. German sappers are working methodically, planting teller mines in the riverbed. Officers supervise from the near bank. Nobody expects an attack. British armor is miles away. Then 4 jeeps roar out of the trees, machine guns blazing. Twin Vickers on each vehicle pour hundreds of rounds into the German positions. Sappers scatter. Officers dive for cover. The jeeps splash through the ford, still firing, and take up positions on the far bank. When German infantry arrive with mortars, Juni pulls back across the river. For 3 days, PPA holds that ford open against German attempts to recapture it. Every time enemy troops approach, jeep-mounted machine guns drive them back. When British armor finally arrives, Juni personally leads the tanks and armored vehicles across. The 4th Armored Brigade commander writes in his after-action report, "This ford, held by 4 vehicles and 10 men, enabled us to advance 2 days ahead of schedule. Had the Germans destroyed it, we would have required engineers, bridging equipment, and substantial infantry support to force a crossing." But nothing compares to what happens in April 1945. April 21st, Lake Comacchio, northern Italy. The war in Europe is nearly over. German forces are collapsing. But around Lake Comacchio, Wehrmacht units still hold strong defensive positions. Allied planners estimate clearing the area will require weeks of coordinated attacks by multiple divisions. Peniakoff is not there. He lost his left hand in a firefight in December and is hospitalized in England. Jean Canary now commands PPA. Under his leadership, the unit has expanded to 74 men operating armed jeeps, From amphibious WWII vehicles, Canary leads his patrols into the watery maze around Lake Comacchio. For 7 days, PPA fights alongside Italian partisans of the Garibaldi Brigade and elements of the 27th Lancers. They ambush German convoys. They attack defended positions. They clear village after village. Lieutenant McCallum dies leading his patrol into a town when a Panzerfaust destroys his jeep. April the 28th, 1945, dawn. Canary approaches Chioggia with 9 men in 3 jeeps. 700 German soldiers hold the town. Allied command has ordered PPA to bypass it. The garrison is too strong. Canary ignores the order. He walks alone into German headquarters and tells the commanding officer, a complete fabrication. Massive Allied forces are surrounding the town. Resistance is hopeless. Further fighting will only result in unnecessary bloodshed. The German commander, exhausted and demoralized, believes him. 700 Wehrmacht soldiers surrender without a shot. 2 days later, Captain John Campbell's patrol charges an 80mm gun battery. It's broad daylight. German crews man their weapons. Campbell's 6 jeeps attack in line, all 12 machine guns firing simultaneously. The devastating broadside shocks the German defenders. 300 troops surrender. In 10 days of operations around Lake Comacchio, Popski's private army captures 1,335 prisoners, seizes 16 field guns, destroys countless vehicles and supplies, and suffers 3 men killed and 5 wounded. A German colonel captured at Chioggia later tells interrogators, "We thought we were facing a reinforced battalion with tank support. When I learned you had 9 men, I did not believe it. Your commander lied to me." Canary's response becomes legendary. "No, I told you massive forces surrounded you. I just didn't mention they were German forces, surrounded by us." This story gets even more incredible. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future episodes about World War II's most audacious warriors. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. Popski's private army is in Austria, near the town of Tarvisio, when the message arrives. Vladimir Peniakoff, wearing a fearsome hook prosthetic where his left hand used to be, gathers his men together. They've been fighting for 3 years. They've operated in North Africa, Italy, and Austria. They've traveled thousands of miles, raided hundreds of targets, captured thousands of prisoners. Peniakoff keeps his remarks brief. "Well done, lads. We had a good run." That's it. No speeches, no ceremony, just acknowledgement that an extraordinary chapter has closed. In September 1945, Popski's private army is officially disbanded in Austria. Its members return to their original units. The smallest independent fighting force in British military history ceases to exist. Total operational lifetime, 36 months. 20 of those months spent in continuous combat operations. The production numbers tell the story of PPA's impact. Maximum strength, 120 men. Total casualties over 3 years, approximately 20 killed, 40 wounded. Enemy casualties and prisoners, over 2,000 confirmed. Aircraft destroyed, dozens. Vehicles destroyed, hundreds. Supply dumps, fuel depots, ammunition stores, communications installations, bridges, and other strategic targets destroyed. Countless. More importantly, PPA tied down entire German battalions for rear area security, battalions that could have been fighting at the front. They gathered intelligence that shaped Allied operations across 2 theaters. They rescued Allied airmen. They liberated towns. They fought alongside Italian partisans and helped establish civilian administrations in liberated territory. A captured German staff officer's diary, recovered after the war, includes this entry from November 1944. "British irregular forces operating behind our lines. Strength unknown. Methods unknown. Impossible to predict their movements or targets. commander recommends 2 companies pulled from front for depot security. That's the real measure of PPA's success, forcing the enemy to divert scarce resources chasing ghosts. After the war, Peniakoff serves as liaison officer between British and Soviet forces in Austria until 1946. He's demobilized, settles in England with his second wife, Pamela, and writes a best-selling memoir, Popski's Private Army. He gives radio broadcasts. He becomes famous, or as famous as a modest Belgian engineer can become. But Peniakoff refuses celebrity. When journalists ask him to describe his greatest achievement, he talks about his men, not himself. When military historians press him to explain his tactical genius, he insists he simply applied common sense. When former German officers tell him they admired his audacity, he changes the subject. Vladimir Peniakoff dies in London in May 1951 of a brain tumor. He's 54 years old. Hundreds attend his funeral, including former PPA members who traveled from across Britain. One veteran places a shoulder flash reading PPA on the coffin. Another leaves an astrolabe cap badge. In 2008, on what would have been Peniakoff's 111th birthday, the PPA Memorial is unveiled at the British National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. Nearly 250 veterans attend, PPA, LRDG, SAS, and Italian partisans. Captain John Campbell, who led those final raids in April 1945, gives the dedication speech. He quotes something a PPA veteran once said, "Popski taught us that rules exist to protect conventional thinking, but conventional thinking never won a war. Audacity, intelligence, and absolute determination, those win wars, and those require no credentials except courage." Modern special forces around the world study Popski's Private Army. The SAS mobility troops operate using principles Peniakoff established. Small, highly trained units with devastating firepower, operating independently behind enemy lines, using deception and surprise rather than overwhelming force. American Special Forces teach his tactics at Fort Bragg. Israeli commandos analyze his raids and training exercises. The unit that every general said couldn't possibly work became the template for modern special operations. Because sometimes the most valuable credential isn't what's written on paper. It's what's proven in the desert at dawn, in the mountains at midnight, in the flooded streets of a forgotten Italian town where 9 men convinced 700 to surrender without firing a shot. Vladimir Popski Peniakoff was a 45-year-old factory manager with no military training who built the most effective small unit of World War II. He proved that audacity beats credentials, that intelligence beats firepower, and that the impossible is just another problem waiting for an unconventional solution. The generals called his operations suicide. History called them genius. If this story amazed you, check out our more videos, where we reveal how another underestimated warrior changed the course of history. And don't forget to subscribe. We're bringing you the untold stories that textbooks forgot.